Tsai Liang's films Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour perfectly encapsulate the complex feelings and emotions that teenagers and adults experience. Each of Tsai Liang's films shares similar themes and atmospheres, but with Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour specifically, they fit together like puzzle pieces. Rebels of the Neon God, released in 1992, surrounds a small group of young teens trying to get the most out of Taipei that they possibly can. From committing minor crimes to playing arcade games, each character yearns to escape the boredom of life at home. Following this film, Vive L'amour was released in 1994, and similarly to Rebels of the Neon God, follows a small group of adults dreading their mundane lifestyles, engaging in sexual adventures, and to use Taipei to seek their unfulfilled desires. Both films are very similar, but through cinematic strategies, themes, and the role of Taipei, Vive L'amour is a sequel to Rebels of the Neon God. To begin with, let's look at the shared themes of both films and how they connect to each other. Both Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour explore themes of youth, urban alienation, mourning of a mundane life, longing of a connection, and even more of a mourning of nostalgia. In Rebels of the Neon God, we see each character struggle with a disconnection from their home and families, and because of this, they seek and find their own pleasure outside of the house. But in Vive L'amour, the film is more centered around mourning the life that each character had in Rebels of the Neon God. In that film, Shokong, Tsai, and Ping were allowed more room to live freely without thinking much of responsibility or consequences of their actions. As this idea emerges in Vive L'amour, all characters struggle with feeling estranged and lonely despite the bustling city of Taipei. Writer Chris Berry states that, quote, "Instead of meaningful narrative and exchanges between characters allowing for the sustained engagement of the spectators, most of the time we are witness to events that turn out to be meaningless and empty beyond their status as signifiers of despair, loneliness, alienation, isolation, banality, and boredom," end quote. Knowing Tsai Liang, these simple exchanges are intentional and have every purpose behind them. As seen in this scene in Vive L'amour of Shokong longing at Ajung, we get a sense of disconnection and alienation despite their close proximity, and seen in this scene of Rebels of the Neon God of Shokong and Tsai staring at the arcade games with a sense of emptiness. Tsai Liang puts an emphasis on the quietness and subtlety of emotions. He is communicating that across these films, there is a silent struggle shared between all characters. Now that we have talked about the themes that both films share, let's shift our focus to how the role of Taipei intertwines with Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour. Tsai Liang tells an interviewer that, quote, "I go back to Malaysia every now and then, and that's when I feel a kind of contrast with Taiwan. I come back to Taiwan and I feel that it's still sort of shifting and changing. The films that I make are really about life, especially my own life, and my views of life, and little by little I think they've left behind the immediate context of Taiwan, so they're not exactly about reality in that sense." Each character in these films are a variation of Tsai Liang in one way or another. He perhaps grew up feeling isolated and alone, which many of the characters experience. Everyone goes through many shifts and changes in their life, as does Tsai Liang, and this was communicated through the evolution of Taipei. In both films, Taipei is used to represent each character's repressed and unfulfilled desires. Because it does represent these components that eventually become unachievable, each film exists in a universe where what one wants isn't necessarily taken into consideration. In an analysis of Taiwanese cinema during the 1990s, writer Laurent Michelin states that, quote, "Taiwan, a society that was still largely rural in the 1950s, has had a bad experience of its overly rapid urbanization. A mere glance at the layout, or the lack of it, of Taiwanese towns is enough to perceive the problem. Here again, rapid economic development is the source of Taiwan's urban ills," end quote. As the city took on a more corporate and professional outlet in Vive L'amour compared to the playfulness of Rebels of the Neon God, it became something that each character resented. Even if they originally yearned for an emotional connection, Physical intimacy was more realistic, and even that became unfulfilling. As Taipei evolved, it no longer served the intended purpose and became memories of the past, a new symbol for adulthood, and a reminder of the nostalgia that was once present. Next, I want to discuss the prominent cinematic techniques that Tsai Liang uses in his rhetorical approach for both Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour. The most significant cinematic techniques that Tsai Liang uses in his rhetorical approach is sonic rhetoric, the dilution of color, and the length of camera shots. Both films are relatively quiet and allow the actions and emotions of each character to fill the screen and reach the audience instead. With the sounds of Taipei consuming the majority of the sound of the film, critic Chuck Stevens writes that, quote, "The electro drones of car alarms and street crossing signals compete with the constant chirruping of cell phones and doorbells to blot out lyrical cues and melodic coercions. The absence of dominant sound and substantial dialogue allows the audience to sit with their thoughts and own interpretations. It has even more of an impact on Vive L'amour, as the very concepts and core of the film become more intense with the absence of sound. The colors of the city that make Taipei lively get increasingly diluted from the start of Rebels of the Neon God to the end of Vive L'amour. This strategy conveys the loss of youth and continuous disconnection that each character feels. What once was a city that could fulfill their desires in Rebels of the Neon God becomes a city that is as empty and lonely as the characters in Vive L'amour. Tsai Liang's signature technique of long shots is recurrent and used to portray a sense of alienation. In the final scene of Vive L'amour, Mei Lin is sitting on a park bench, crying as the camera remains steady on her. Although it makes many viewers uncomfortable, it really ties in both films as a whole, because all of the feelings that are apparent in Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour come to a head and surface to the audience. The cup of emotions finally overflows, and it is now overwhelming for Mei Lin. Tsai Liang's Rebels of the Neon God and Vive L'amour serve as a message of the mourning of nostalgia and adolescence while experiencing the passage of time. In both films, the images of the city of Taipei are representative of each character's repressed and unconscious desires that they are constantly seeking. Through the use of sonic rhetoric, Tsai Liang is able to draw the audience into the uncomfortable scenes in order for them to truly understand the pure boredom and unsatisfying life that the characters in both films live. We, as an audience, are left wondering, where does Shou Kong, Mei Lin, and Ajung live after seeing them in such vulnerable states? Will they ever achieve a fulfilling life, or will they continue on with the mundane cycle that is their daily lives? At one moment or another, we all mourn nostalgia and elements of our youth. As seen in Rebels of the Neon God, Shou Kong, Atse, and Aping engage in the core of adolescence and what makes life exciting, even if it borders on danger. They bask in their teenage angst before succumbing to adulthood in Vive L'amour. In Rebels of the Neon God, the thrill of adolescence is consuming, but it only lasts so long before we inevitably merge into a meaningless cycle of a struggle to find meaning and connection in life as seen in Vive L'amour.